He liked her as a girlfriend?
Yeah, he wanted to be her boyfriend. She just felt like he was trying to set her up. That's what she told me. She like, I think he's just trying to kill me.
I love her, and I'm gonna fight for her to have justice, because I don't think it's fair that we're losing our kids being gunned down every day in the streets.
It's still under investigation what exactly happened Friday afternoon in the 6400 block of South Eberhard. But neighbors say Bonnie and a friend were walking along the sidewalk when a gunman started firing.
When the bullet hit, it was so powerful she fell on the steps.
They were supposed to be just kids, passing notes in class, hanging out after school, dreaming about the future. But instead, these teenage girls walked a path so dark it stunned even seasoned detectives. Behind innocent smiles were chilling secrets, violent rivalries, ruthless plots, and choices that turned classmates into victims and their own lives into cautionary tales. What makes their stories so terrifying isn't just the crimes themselves, but the ages of those who committed them. Courtrooms were left in shock, families were destroyed, and entire neighborhoods whispered their names in fear. These weren't headlines about grown criminals hardened by years on the streets. These were high school girls who showed the world just how dangerous youth can become. We're shedding light on the most evil and dangerous teenage girls whose actions shook Chicago and left scars that will never fade. Stay with me, because once you hear their stories, you won't believe how young true darkness can begin. Case 1. Gakira K.I. Barnes. Just after she tweeted her exact location, a hooded gunman appeared, and in mere seconds, 17-year-old Gakira K.I. Barnes was shot dead. That lightning strike moment grabs you from the start, but the deeper story beneath it, of a brilliant young girl swept into gang violence, the failure of early intervention, and the haunting traces she left in her online words, is what keeps your attention to the last frame. Gakira grew up amid endless loss. Her father was murdered before her first birthday, and 2 close friends were killed during her childhood. School offered a possible escape. She attended Perspectives/IIT Math and Science Academy, once shy and smart, even seeking help when frustrated in class. But at just 14, an arrest in a firearms case disrupted her path, though charges were dropped after witnesses recanted. By then she'd been drawn into the Gangster Disciples, a street gang on Chicago's South Side, and began to emerge as a notorious young figure in factional violence. The investigation into her activities revealed she was suspected of involvement in numerous shootings. Police sources believed she had killed as many as 20 people between 2011 and 2014, including a rival gang member, O.D. Perry. Allegations often based on rumors and street intel, since no charges were ever brought due to lack of witness cooperation and physical evidence. Psychologically, a peculiar duality seems to define her. On the street, she transformed into K.I., a hard-edged persona who flaunted bravado in homemade rap videos and raged at rival factions on Twitter. Yet, her tweets also revealed grief, most poignantly after her friend Raisin, Lil B. Shaw, was killed, when she posted that the pain was unbearable. Online researchers, including those at Columbia University, turned her torrent of more than 27,000 tweets into a groundbreaking study. They trained an algorithm to detect emotional states like grief, aggression, or loss, highlighting how social media can escalate real-world violence and how early detection might enable intervention. Then came the fatal tweet, a photo showing her location at a porch in Woodlawn. Hours later, she was shot multiple times and died at the hospital by late afternoon on April 11, 2014. The legal proceedings never followed through with criminal charges in her case. No one was ever arrested. Later, court documents would implicate rival gang leader King Von as the shooter, based on witness identification, but prosecutors cited insufficient evidence to charge him. There was no trial testimony, no sentencing hearing, only an enduring vacuum where accountability should have been. Yet, her death would reverberate in a gang war that eventually led to the high-profile killing of rapper FBG Duck in 2020, with Barnes' death cited as a catalyst. In the aftermath, social work experts saw the tragedy as emblematic of broader systemic failure. What if her grief-laden tweets had been noticed by someone able to intervene, with community programs rather than criminalization? Social media may not predict crime, but human actors interpreting emotional signals might prevent a young life from spiraling into tragedy. Case 2. Regina and Margaret DeFrancisco. It begins with a late evening call on June 6, 2000. Regina, a magnetic 17-year-old, lures her boyfriend, 22-year-old truck driver Oscar Velasquez, to a Lower West Side home in Chicago, promising something intimate and urgent. Within mere seconds, the chilling truth unfolds. Margaret, Regina's 16-year-old sister, emerges from behind and fires a single shot into his head. From this shocking opening, the investigation accelerates. Nail polish remover is used to burn Oscar's body, and the sisters attempt to torch both him and his Camaro Z28, but leave behind crucial clues. Law enforcement pieces together a web of deception. Forensics confirm the fatal bullet and the accelerant used to burn not only Oscar's body but his car, suggesting a calculated effort to destroy evidence. Detectives trace calls and interviews. Phone records reveal repeated contact from the sisters' home to Oscar in the days before his death. Witnesses trace the burned Camaro back to them. Sheets matching those used to wrap Oscar are discovered in their home, and luminol reveals cleaned-up blood traces. At the heart of legal proceedings lies the friend, Veronica Garcia, who supplied the gun believing it would be used for a robbery. Under pressure, she cuts a plea deal to testify against the sisters. In trial testimony, she claims she had no idea a murder was planned and that she believed it was for robbery. In truth, her words became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Prosecution corroborates her testimony through other witnesses, friends who testify that Regina confessed, saying they had killed a guy, and another who says Margaret kicked the victim in the head so he could die faster. Regina took the stand, framing the killing as self-defense. Oscar allegedly pulled a gun on her, and she curled up on the floor begging for her life. She says she heard a shot, saw Margaret with the weapon, and claims Veronica suggested disposing of the body. Margaret, called during her first trial, echoes a self-defense narrative, claiming she fired to protect Regina after a confrontation with Oscar, though she says she cannot recall pulling the trigger. After intense jury deliberation, Regina is convicted of first-degree murder during armed robbery. While Margaret's jury deadlocks 111 for conviction, the lone holdout cannot accept that someone so young could commit such violence. Retrial for Margaret begins months later. Once again, Veronica testifies, the same chilling narrative unfolds, and this time, the jury convicts her of first-degree murder. Then comes the sentencing hearing. Regina is sentenced to 35 years in prison in September 2004, and Margaret receives 46 years in December of that year. Appeals follow, but the convictions stand. Case 3. Bathtub Girls, Sandra and Beth. From the moment you hear that two teenage sisters plotted their mother's death as nothing more than a bath gone wrong, you're drawn into a chilling labyrinth of secrets, desperation, and dark calculation. This is the shocking true story of the Bathtub Girls. On January 18, 2003, in Mississauga, Ontario, Sandra, then 16, and her 15-year-old sister Beth gave their mother alcohol and Tylenol 3 pills and drowned her in the bathtub in what they intended to resemble a tragic accident. Their plan hinged on collecting insurance money, believing that death would bring them freedom and the means to escape poverty and neglect. The investigation languished for almost a year, as authorities initially accepted the scenario of accidental drowning among alcohol use. It wasn't until a friend at a party confided what he'd heard that suspicion sparked. That friend agreed to work with police under surveillance, wearing wires to record incriminating admissions. Investigators unearthed damning internet searches and chat logs detailing the sisters' motive and planning. During legal proceedings, the sisters, arrested in January 2004, provided taped confessions and faced a wave of evidence. Forensic toxicology proving extreme intoxication, documentation of their online research into administering a lethal mix of sedatives and alcohol, and witness testimony from friends they had involved. The trial began in late 2005. By June 2006, they were convicted of first-degree murder and received the maximum youth sentence under Canada's Youth Criminal Justice Act, 10 years, structured as 6 years of incarceration followed by 4 years of community supervision. At the sentencing hearing, Justice Bruce Duncan acknowledged the dreadful upbringing these girls endured, growing up under an alcoholic, depressive mother, burdened with adult responsibilities from a young age. Yet he did not shy from laying out the calculated cruelty of their actions. He observed, "The two defendants set out to commit the perfect crime, but instead they created the perfect prosecution. The case against them is overwhelming." From there, the story turns to rehabilitation and its implications for criminal justice policy. Released to halfway houses prior to serving the full decade, Sandra in 2009, Beth in 2010, they each pursued higher education. By 2020, Sandra had graduated university and become a scientist. Beth had completed law school, become married, and entered motherhood, raising complex questions about redemption, societal safety, and the limits of second chances under a system designed for youth. Case 4, Edwina Howard. It begins on a tense November morning in 1949 at DuSable High School in Chicago. As the clock nears lunch, four teenage girls converge near the corner of 49th and Wabash, fueled by simmering tensions and a whispered plan to confront a peer, Levon Kane. Emotions escalate into terrifying impulses. By that afternoon, bullets have claimed the life of a 17-year-old student. The investigation that follows reveals a chilling psychological profile. 19-year-old Edwina Howard, accompanied by her younger sister Wilma and two Rivers sisters, seized firearms with alarming resolve. They awaited Levon, and when she approached, the younger sister allegedly pulled the trigger, and then the others joined in. Conflict that might have begun as juvenile intimidation spiraled into deadly action. All four are swiftly indicted on murder charges, and as the legal proceedings unfold, their fate seems sealed by this sudden eruption of violence. The psychological analysis suggests a tempest of adolescent identity struggles, group solidarity, and impulsive retaliation. A volatile mix that, when armed and unchecked, erupted into tragedy. The prosecutor's case highlights premeditation. Guns acquired at home, bullets loaded, a shared intent to frighten, maybe deter, and yet an irreversible lapse into lethal aggression. Defense accounts scatter in contrast. They frame Levon Kane as threatening, aggressive, even physically intimidating beforehand, but the state's witnesses paint a more disturbed tableau. No words, no provocation. A sudden, shocking volley of gunfire at point-blank range. The absence of a jury, these teenage defendants waive that right, puts the judge at the center of the trial testimony. His voice, somber and unflinching, condemns the act as cold-blooded, premeditated killing, emphasizing society's alarm at juvenile violence and urging severe penalties to deter similar tragedies. He sentences Edwina Howard to 50 years in prison, with the other three, Helen Rivers and Wilma Howard, among them, each receiving 14-year terms. The bare facts of sentencing are stark. The judge's rationale is brutally clear. A bullet fired by a youth is just as lethal as one fired by an adult, and community safety demands accountability. Amid legal proceedings and sentencing, broader issues emerge, especially the menace of unregistered, unwatched firearms proliferating in neighborhoods, amplifying adolescent disputes into mortal danger. The case becomes a cautionary tale in public safety. As the judge noted, over 400,000 unregistered guns in Chicago, exposed to potential murderers and youngsters. That's not just a tragic story, it's a policy flashpoint. Case 5, Wanda Stopa. It began with flickering lights in a bohemian studio in Chicago's Towertown district in the early 1920s, where late-night conversations danced to jazz and freedom was on the prowl. Into that restless world stepped Wanda Elaine Stopa, a brilliant, emotionally intense woman who had shattered glass ceilings to become Chicago's youngest and first female assistant U.S. District Attorney. Her presence sparked fascination, and her gaze, cold blue eyes set against fierce ambition, hinted at something more dangerous. The hook is immediate. A rising legal star driven by passion, who ended everything with a single, frantic act. Behind the polished veneer lay a deeply unsettled psyche. Raised in a strict Polish immigrant household, Stopa sought liberation. That drive propelled her into the John Marshall Law School, into bar admission, and into the prosecutor's office. But ambition isn't always steady ground. It becomes treacherous when warped by love and possessiveness. Her romance with advertising executive Kenley Smith developed amid the heady creativity of the studio. She demanded exclusivity. When he refused to leave his wife, her emotional state darkened. Then came the fateful investigation. Stopa made her way to the Smiths' cottage outside Chicago, confronting the object of her affection's wife. The confrontation spiraled horribly sideways. Her intended target escaped, but the 68-year-old gardener, Henry Manning, was struck and killed by her bullet. Headlines soon carried her name across Illinois. Law enforcement launched a manhunt that radiated through Chicago. The story of a glamorous lawyer gone rogue was irresistible. The public watched as officers pursued not just a suspect, but a symbol unraveling in real time. Legal proceedings never came. No trial testimony, no sentencing hearing, because Stopa took her own life the very next day. Fleeing to Detroit's Statler Hotel, she ingested cyanide in a final, silent statement. The tragedy cut law enforcement off mid-track, denying the courtroom the confrontation that might have become landmark law. Still, the aftermath held powerful meaning. Her brothers suggested her estranged Russian husband, a self-styled count, rumored to be a gambler and bootlegger, provided the poison, casting him as a malevolent influence in her emotional collapse. Her suicide not only ended her story, it reframed everything as a cautionary tale. At her funeral in Chicago, curiosity turned to spectacle. Up to 10,000 spectators reportedly lined the streets to pay their respects, or to witness the fallen legal star. Her death scene echoed Lady Macbeth's descent, a brilliant figure collapsing in private but dying in the public eye. In that silent crowd lay the broader justice-related lesson: how deeply intertwined power, reputation, mental health, and tragedy can become when pedestal and persona collide. Though Wanda Stopa never reached trial, her case raises enduring questions about how investigative processes handle emotionally driven individuals who have both legal expertise and psychological volatility. Her story suggests enormous challenges for law enforcement. Tracking a suspect whose legal training gives her a head start, whose emotional intensity fuels unpredictability, yet whose mind might be unraveling. Case 6. Brittany Covington. It starts in the final moments of New Year's Eve, when an apparently innocent meeting at a McDonald's in suburban Streamwood becomes the catalyst for a chilling online spectacle. An acquaintance of an 18-year-old man with mental disabilities picks him up, unbeknownst to him, in a stolen van. What begins as a ride turns into an abduction as the victim is taken, without consent, into an apartment where he will be subjected to relentless humiliation and abuse that will soon be broadcast live. By now, curiosity is piqued, and you're already leaning in. What mental state could drive teenage perpetrators to escalate a play fight into something so chilling that one of them chooses to document it, live, as if daring the world and law enforcement to stop them? Brittany Covington, just 18, narrates the ordeal on Facebook Live, supplying a human voice to the depravity, transforming private cruelty into a viral crime scene. Law enforcement, both on the scene and behind the screens, launches a rapid joint investigation. Streamwood officers trace a missing person report back to the live stream, identify the location, and rescue a wounded, confused victim wandering the Chicago streets clothed improperly and physically battered. Meanwhile, Chicago police detectives trace property damage at the apartment and recover the stolen van, tightening the case. By legal proceedings, all four Brittany and her sister Tanisha, along with Jordan Hill and Tesfaye Cooper, are charged with aggravated kidnapping, hate crime, aggravated unlawful restraint, aggravated battery, and in some cases residential burglary and auto theft. Soon comes trial testimony, though much of the proceedings are resolved through plea negotiations. Brittany becomes the first to accept responsibility. She pleads guilty to hate crime, intimidation, and aggravated battery. In exchange, kidnapping charges are dropped. During the sentencing hearing, the judge opts against incarceration for her, saying that time behind bars might not serve her development. Instead, she is placed on 4 years of probation, ordered to complete 200 hours of community service, and is banned from using social media for 4 years, a device that addresses both public safety and personal rehabilitation. Contrast that with her co-defendants. Tanisha receives 3 years in prison, Jordan Hill 8 years, and Tesfaye Cooper 7 years, all for the more severe roles they played. Through Psychological Profile, viewers can explore how group dynamics, peer influence, and social media's social validation loop can feed dangerous impulses. Brittany's decision to livestream is a multifaceted impulse: attention-seeking, digital bravado, or a sudden sociopathic detachment. Her sentence, which avoids imprisonment, raises profound questions about accountability, rehabilitation, and whether the system can or should steer young offenders away from future harm. Case 7. Sarah and Kolb. On a cold January afternoon in 2005, a routine lunch invitation turned into a chilling prelude to murder. A teenager's life tragically extinguished in a silent fast food parking lot. That moment marked the beginning of one of the most disturbing schoolyard crimes in Illinois history. It was 16-year-old Sarah Kolb who lured another teen, Adrienne Reynolds, into a murder so calculated, so cold, that even investigators struggled to reconcile how friendship could transform into fatal violence. The investigation began when Adrienne vanished after failing to show up at her job. Authorities soon recovered evidence leading them to a horrifying scene. Adrienne had been strangled in a Taco Bell parking lot by Sarah and her co-defendant, Corey Gregory. Their attempt to destroy the evidence by burning her body at Sarah's grandparents' farm failed. They then called in 16-year-old Nathan Gadet to help dismember her remains before discarding them at the Black Hawk State Historic Site. That level of planning and disposal was a clear signal to investigators of callous intent rather than a reckless impulse. Early on, investigators sought to unravel the psychological profile of Sarah, a popular but volatile teenager who may have interpreted friendship and rivalry with lethal consequences. Her targeting of Adrienne, triggered perhaps by jealousy over a shared acquaintance, suggests impulsivity cloaked in a disturbing capacity for calculation and concealment. Prosecutors brought Sarah and Corey to trial on first-degree murder and concealment charges. The jury in Sarah's first trial deadlocked, unable to agree on verdicts, a chilling reminder of how close she came to slipping through legal cracks. The mistrial left one juror favoring acquittal while 11 favored conviction. A second trial reconvened in early 2006, and this time the jury found Sarah guilty on all counts. During the trial testimony, chilling details emerged. Statements from Sarah's peers revealed alarming nonchalance. She had boasted in private about taking Adrienne out, and displayed no remorse while directing others to assist in dismembering the body. When the sentencing hearing unfolded, the court weighed mitigating and aggravating factors. On one hand were her youth, supportive testimony from friends and family, and her lack of prior criminal history. On the other, cold brutality, a plotted murder, manipulation of peers, and indifference in the aftermath. The sentencing judge described her as cold and callous. Convinced that rehabilitation was unlikely, the court imposed a staggering total of 53 years, 48 for the murder and 5 for concealment, reflecting a societal imperative to protect the public while acknowledging the gravity of a crime committed by a minor. Years later, Sarah's legal team appealed, arguing that a juvenile should not face a de facto life sentence without adequate consideration of her youth and potential for rehabilitation. The appellate court, however, rejected her petition, finding that the sentencing court had indeed considered both her age and the seriousness of the offense, without violating constitutional protections. Case 8. Jeanette Slowinski. On a summer morning in 2005, a tragedy on the streets of Skokie, Illinois, would capture the attention of the entire Chicagoland area and ignite debates about mental health, responsibility, and justice. At the center of this case was Jeanette Slowinski, a former model who, in a moment of emotional turmoil, made a decision that ended the lives of 3 promising young men and altered countless others forever. Her story is one that blends psychological instability with the devastating consequences of impulsive choices, becoming a reminder of how fragile the line between personal crisis and public danger can be. Jeanette's background seemed, at first glance, unremarkable. She was working in the fashion and modeling industry and living with her parents in Schaumburg. However, beneath that surface lay an unstable emotional world. Reports later revealed that she had been struggling with depression and a volatile personal life, compounded by a recent breakup that left her distraught. Investigators would eventually describe her actions as those of a woman teetering on the edge of a breakdown. This psychological profile became central to the case, as prosecutors and defense attorneys debated whether she was a criminally reckless driver or a deeply troubled young woman whose untreated mental health struggles culminated in catastrophe. On July 14, 2005, Slowinski got into her red Mustang after an argument with her mother. Distraught, she reportedly told people she wanted to end her life. What followed was a high-speed drive that turned into a fatal crash. She ran a red light at a busy intersection in Skokie and slammed into another car. Inside that vehicle were 3 men, musicians John Glick, Michael Dahlquist, and Douglas Mice, who were waiting at the light. All 3 were killed instantly. The fact that Slowinski survived with only minor injuries only heightened the outrage. What began as an attempted suicide had become, in the eyes of law enforcement, a reckless act that caused multiple deaths. The investigation moved quickly, as officers pieced together eyewitness accounts, physical evidence from the crash site, and Slowinski's own statements. Witnesses reported seeing her speeding and disregarding traffic signals, while psychological evaluations painted a picture of a young woman overwhelmed by despair but not detached from reality. These conflicting narratives shaped the legal proceedings that followed. Prosecutors argued that her actions were not just tragic but criminal, that she had chosen to weaponize her car in a way that made the deaths entirely preventable. The defense countered with testimony about her fragile mental state, emphasizing that her intention was not to harm others, but to end her own suffering. During trial testimony, families of the victims expressed the irreplaceable loss of 3 men whose lives had been filled with promise, creativity, and kindness. The victims were not just random commuters. They were well-known musicians in the Chicago indie rock scene, men whose deaths left a deep cultural and personal void. Their loved ones demanded accountability, pressing the court to treat Slowinski's case not as a mere accident, but as a crime of reckless indifference to human life. Slowinski was initially charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, an unusual step in vehicular homicide cases. Prosecutors argued that her decision to speed through the red light while expressing suicidal intent constituted the kind of conscious disregard for life that met the definition of murder. Her defense attorneys pushed back, seeking lesser charges that acknowledged her mental state. Ultimately, the court reduced the charges from murder to reckless homicide, a decision that sparked mixed reactions. At her sentencing hearing in 2007, Slowinski was given 8 years in prison. For many, the sentence felt lenient compared to the magnitude of the loss. Yet others viewed it as a recognition of her psychological struggles, acknowledging that her intention had not been to kill, but to end her own pain. The justice system faced the difficult task of balancing punishment with compassion, and the outcome left lingering debates about how mental health should factor into sentencing. Slowinski served only a portion of her sentence, being released in 2010 after roughly 3 years in prison due to good behavior and credit for time served. Her early release reignited controversy. Families of the victims expressed anguish, believing that justice had not been fully delivered. The Jeanette Slowinski case remains a haunting example of how individual despair can intersect with public tragedy. Case 9. Centoya Brown. In 2004, a crime in Nashville, Tennessee, would ignite national debate about justice, trauma, and the fate of young offenders. At just 16 years old, Centoya Brown became the focus of an intense investigation that forced the courts, and later the public, to question how much a teenager's environment and psychological state should matter when facing life-altering legal proceedings. Her case began with a single night that spiraled into tragedy. Born in 1988, Centoya's early life was marked by instability. Accounts of her childhood describe a pattern of neglect, abuse, and exposure to violence that left lasting scars. By her mid-teens, she had fallen under the influence of an older man known as Cutthroat, who exploited her, coerced her into sex work, and subjected her to physical control. It was under these circumstances that she crossed paths with Johnny Allen, a 43-year-old real estate agent. On the night of August 6, 2004, Allen picked her up and brought her to his home. What happened inside would change the course of her life. According to trial testimony, Centoya later claimed that she believed Allen was reaching for a weapon as he lay in bed beside her. In a state of fear and survival mode, she shot him once in the head. Afterward, she fled in his vehicle, taking some of his belongings. From the outset, the investigation by Nashville police focused heavily on motive. Detectives built their case around the robbery, portraying it as the primary reason for the shooting, while the defense stressed the psychological lens of trauma and exploitation. The legal proceedings were swift and severe. Despite her age, prosecutors pushed to try Centoya as an adult, citing the seriousness of the crime. At trial, expert witnesses described her mental state, noting both her cognitive development and the lingering effects of abuse. Still, the jury convicted her of first-degree murder and aggravated robbery. During the sentencing hearing, the judge imposed a life sentence with eligibility for parole only after 51 years, effectively ensuring she would remain in prison until old age. Legal experts questioned whether the trial fully accounted for her background and the influence of coercive control. Centoya's story became emblematic of debates over whether the law adequately differentiates between hardened criminals and teenagers acting out of fear, immaturity, or desperation. While incarcerated, she began a remarkable journey of rehabilitation. Enrolling in education programs, she eventually earned her associate and bachelor's degrees through Lipscomb University's Initiative for Inmates. Reports from prison staff and mentors described her as a model prisoner who mentored other young women and worked to transform her circumstances. Her case drew national attention through a 2011 documentary titled Me Facing Life. Centoya's story, which brought the psychological context and injustice of her long sentence into sharper public focus. In the years that followed, a wave of legal reform movements emphasized the science of adolescent brain development, arguing that young people lack the full capacity for impulse control and decision-making. These findings reached the highest levels of the justice system, influencing Supreme Court decisions that barred mandatory life sentences for juveniles in certain cases. Centoya's situation became a rallying point for activists who demanded reconsideration of how juvenile offenders are treated in the courts. Her petitions for clemency gained traction as lawmakers, celebrities, and public figures called for mercy. The Tennessee Board of Parole held hearings and reviewed her record, considering testimony from psychologists, prison officials, and advocates. In January 2019, after years of legal appeals and growing pressure, Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam granted Centoya Brown clemency. He cited her extraordinary rehabilitation efforts and the unfairness of her lengthy sentence. She was released later that year after serving 15 years in prison. Since then, she has continued to speak publicly about her experiences, writing a memoir and advocating for criminal justice reform, particularly for victims of trafficking and exploited youth who end up in the system. Case 10. Paula Cooper. It begins in Gary, Indiana, on a spring afternoon in May 1985, when the world would be shaken by a crime shocking in its brutality. A 15-year-old girl named Paula Cooper, along with 3 friends, invaded the home of 78-year-old Bible teacher Ruth Pelka. Asking about Bible lessons was their ruse, but once inside, violence erupted. Paula wielded a butcher knife, stabbing Pelka 33 times in a killing that stunned the community. This act triggered an immediate investigation that exposed not only graphic violence, but a deeper story of childhood trauma and emotional fragmentation. The earliest profile of Paula painted a picture far from a monster. She had endured severe abuse and instability. Reports show she'd been a chronic runaway, had witnessed her mother's suicide attempt, and lived under violent parental control, events that prosecutors largely dismissed but that shaped her fractured psyche. In court, her sister Rhonda tearfully recounted beatings with extension cords, and a childhood at the mercy of despairing parents. Once taken into custody, Paula was considered the ringleader. While her companions, Karen Corder, Denise Thomas, and April Beverly, received lengthy sentences, Paula alone faced the most severe penalty. That set the stage for dramatic legal proceedings and a trial testimony that highlighted not just the crime, but what justice means when a child is involved. At the sentencing hearing in July 1986, the courtroom was packed. Reporters from across the world, legal observers, advocates all looked on. The prosecutor urged the death penalty, stating that cold-blooded murderers should be put to death to atone for crimes they have committed. The defense focused on her traumatic past, but it wasn't enough. Judge James Kimbrough imposed a death sentence by electric chair, a punishment that galvanized global outrage. What followed was an international crusade. A rehabilitation movement of sorts took hold, but not strictly about Paula. Rather, it questioned whether a 15-year-old could ever be beyond redemption. 2 million signatures flooded the Indiana Supreme Court. Appeals reached the governor and the Pope, and organizations worldwide. Amnesty International, Catholic groups in Italy, rose in protest. In the background, legal changes took shape. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled, in Thompson v. Oklahoma, 1988, that executing someone under 16 violated constitutional protections. Indiana's Supreme Court applied that landmark legal proceedings principle to Paula's case. In July 1989, her death sentence was overturned and converted into a 60-year prison term, the maximum statutory alternative. Within prison, Paula earned a GED and pursued college correspondence courses, steps toward intellectual rehabilitation, though her fate remained uncertain. After serving approximately 27 years, she was released on June 17, 2013, a moment that tested whether society can reconcile justice with mercy. But the narrative doesn't end there. Bill Pelka, Ruth Pelka's grandson, carried the story forward. Initially endorsing the death penalty, he underwent a spiritual transformation and embraced forgiveness. He found a journey of hope, a movement among survivors' families advocating alternatives to capital punishment, with forgiveness, not vengeance, as the path to healing. Paula Cooper's story closes with tragedy. In 2015, she died by suicide at age 45, grappling with profound remorse and a legacy that continued to haunt her. If these stories made you think twice, if they gripped you, shocked you, or left you craving to know what lies beneath the surface, hit that subscribe button now and join the Mindframe True Crimes family. Every week, we dive deeper into the hidden corridors of the human mind, unraveling the truths behind the headlines, and the secrets even courtrooms can't fully reveal. And to all my loyal subscribers and returning viewers, Thank you for keeping your mind in the frame. You're the reason we can keep shining a light into the world's darkest corners. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, the mind is the most dangerous place of all. This is Mindframe True Crimes. Until next time.